So everybody's ready? Yeah? All righty. So this table's good. All right. Mercedes, who at your table would like to ask your question? Okay. Come
on. So I noticed that the second most costly item in the entire list is the $5 million dedicated to Central Business District traffic upgrades. I'd like to know what we're upgrading that costs $5 million in traffic lights that's centralized exclusively in the Central Business District.
The Central Business District traffic lighting upgrade is it's a co-op with the state PennDOT to signalize all the intersections in a Central Business District, and so that they are sync with the rest, with all the blocks within a Central Business. Does that make sense?
Sure. Thanks.
It's just an upgrade overall. Can you hear me? Right within the Central Business District of Pittsburgh, downtown.
Yeah,
Right.
So the city's providing a 20% local match. I think it's 44 intersections total. And a lot of what they're doing has to do with changing out with new technology. Some of it's timing, some of it's so that the signals talk to each other. Some of it also is what they call high-res plates, which are the yellow borders. They're a lot easier to see, and they stand out a lot better against sunlight and other kinds of weather.
Can you see?
Hold on.
Sure. The triangle area, all the way from the Point, Boulevard of the Allies, or Fort Pitt Boulevard, Grant Street. So that little triangle area in the Central Business District. Like he said, it is 80% federally matched, so our match is only 20% of that. Okay.
Hi. So our question came about complete streets. I was lucky enough to be the only person that lives in the East End, and everybody else on my table lives in the North Side. So I know that you can't control the buses, but how does complete streets work to prioritize transportation infrastructure to better serve communities in need? That would include better infrastructure for mass transportation to move through, as well as they all live in Perry Hilltop, so the steps that you would need to use every day to get to the transportation.
So the city is developing a complete streets policy, and what that policy is to work to provide our streets that provide accessibility for all modes. And so what we have, kind of historically, is that through federal projects or other means, that a lot of times that transportation has been planned in Pittsburgh, not necessarily for Pittsburgh. And so looking at the city trying to look at things through a complete streets lens is looking at how do we provide ADA ramps in safe passage for people with disabilities? How is it that we start to prioritize how pedestrians move, or how the experience is for things like transit riders, so you're not standing on a 2-foot sidewalk, right next to 4 lanes of traffic. And so, the complete streets policy is kind of shifting how the transportation projects have, where their focus has been within the city. And so it's looking at anything from not only steps in a lot of our hillside neighborhoods, but also sometimes trails, you know, that are off street, because obviously if you, in a lot of our hillside neighborhoods, a lot of our streets are very narrow. And so we can't have people walking and cars driving and you know, in all of these modes in the same space in these narrow streets with with sharp curves. So it's really trying to take a different approach to how we look at transportation. In Pittsburgh, it's a little less complete streets and a little bit more complete networks, in that we know that we can't do everything on one street in the way that you know, a lot of western cities or cities with much wider rights of way and don't have the topography that we do. But it's really kind of shifting the focus on how we look at the streets. So, does that answer your question, or?
I think so.
All right, great.
Hi there. Two of the mayor's goals are extending the useful life of existing assets and delivering city services faster and more efficiently. So given these, can we develop a way to identify vacant structures before they reach the point of no return and then stabilize them so we can avoid costly demolitions?
So, so to the point of how do you identify structures before they become in such disrepair, is that kind of the gist of your question? So one of the things we're doing, and I don't know if Jennifer and David mentioned this at the beginning, but as part of our facilities optimization plan, we created this project last year because, to your point, is the city is been in a reactive mode. We wait till something breaks to fix it, which is not the right thing. You don't wait until your roof starts leaking to fix it, or anything else in your house or personal assets. So what we're doing is doing a comprehensive inventory and assessment of all of our city facilities, looking at what conditions are they in. So the roofs, the building mechanical systems, the facades, everything about a building inside and out. But depending on what conditions it's in, then we need to know what work do we need to do up front. So immediately what the cost is going to be, but also over the next 3 to 5 years, and also long term. So I like to use the analogy that if a roof needs replaced this year, and you know a roof has an average useful life of 20 years, you need to know 20 years from now that you may have X roofs that need repaired. So as a city, we have 300 facilities, so it's not just one roof we have to worry about. So we want to develop a long-term plan that does exactly what you said, is proactive. We not only fix the things that need fixed today, but also have a proactive preventative maintenance strategy in place. So we are budgeting and allocating funds to make those repairs and ongoing maintenance, so things are maintained in a good condition before they fall apart. And then we're also doing that for our other assets. So it's not just facilities, but it's the poles, our fences, our walls, our steps. These are all assets that need a game plan for each different asset, and that's what we're working on.
Does that include vacant housing owned by the city?
Housing owned by the city, that's a separate issue. These are just, the finance department works with the URA on housing in vacant lots. This program I just talked about is just related to city facilities like recreation centers, police stations, things like that. I can let maybe the URA talk more about housing specific issues.
One of the things the URA does to preserve housing is, you can see one of the lines in your handout is party wall program. And what that basically is if the city does tear a house down that's structurally unsound and it's connected to a row house next to it, what that does is that leaves an exposed wall, and that needs, if it were to be repaired immediately, it will help to preserve the house. So we have a program that repairs those walls immediately. It's a grant to the homeowner of that house, and we get out there as fast as we can and get the wall repaired.
Another line that the city has had in its capital budget for a period of time has been around the city's comprehensive plan. And so one of the components of the comprehensive plan that has been completed is its open space plan, which was done in 2013. And part of that was looking at this issue. I mean, it says open space, but a part of it was looking at this kind of issue of vacancy and tax delinquency in the city, and starting to identify where there are places that, because of topography or because of other means that, maybe that, there are different strategies for vacant buildings than there are in others to look at, which is how departments like the Department of Permits, Licenses, and Inspections, focuses on, on demolition, or where, we may have vacant properties that, that we would look at turning into green infrastructure projects, for example, or that, in the last year, the city has, as relative to vacant lots, not vacant structures, has developed an adopt a lot program where it allows for community stewardship of some of these vacant lots that the city has, which, it got through neglect, that as these properties were neglected and fell into disrepair, they ended up becoming, kind of into the city's ownership. It wasn't necessarily an active choice for us, but more a passive choice due to neglect in those areas, so.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I live in Beachview in the South Hills. And our question is, does the city have plans to expand or improve the Pittsburgh T line? And could that be encompassed in the fixing it first priority?
Yeah, it is, but BRT. Yeah. If you want. Sure. Come up again. So the short answer is no. There was, in Beachview specifically, there was a TRID study that was done as a capital budget project about 4 years ago. And that TRID study looked at improvements to Broadway Avenue, to Broadway through Beachview, and not necessarily around expansion of the T service, but how we complement, the business district in Broadway, how we do transit improvements and other improvements in the district as part of a land use plan. And so in that, in a case like that, there were plans that were made, and we have submitted state grants to, with the councilwoman's office, if she's still here, to try to pursue improvements out of that planning work that occurred. And then in other areas of the city, for example, in the downtown to Oakland corridor, the city has been pursuing a planning project known as the Eco Innovation District. And part of that project is looking at the creation of bus rapid transit in the downtown to Oakland corridor, or the downtown Oakland and East End corridor. So not necessarily an expansion of the T, but an expansion of rapid transit in the city. And as part of that project, we're looking to see how we can tie in that rapid transit project with rapid transit like the South Busway, the T, the West Busway, and the East Busway, and how we can, even if some of them are rail and some of them are busway, how we can have a coordinated transit system in coordination with the Port Authority, who is obviously the not part of the city and the agency that runs all of the buses and all of the trains that we have in the city.
Good evening. Our question is, what are the city's plans for traffic calming priorities and budget allocation plans to be more innovative and widespread? In other words, how will the city prioritize what neighborhoods are addressed?
All right. So out front, there is a paper for Complete Streets. We're having a public meeting on July 7th with the policy. So we talked about improvements to a number of different things. Getting traffic calming is another component of what we're looking at as a piece of that. So in the past, we haven't had a way to necessarily address traffic calming. It's been kind of on a very case-by-case basis because we haven't had standards for the Department of Public Works to look at and to kind of look at traffic calming in a neighborhood. So many times what happens is if people want traffic calming, the answer is generally no, because we don't have any standards to build for traffic calming. So as part of the Complete Streets policy, we're really looking to develop that. And a capital budget project from 2015 that was in there was development of Complete Streets guidelines, and those guidelines will include traffic calming as a component of what it looks like, and where we do, what kinds of streets we would actually do traffic calming on. So we can start to set those parameters for neighborhoods that then want to see those types of projects happen.
Okay, so it would perhaps address those areas that are most unsafe to start with?
Well, it would kind of depend on a lot of factors. So I mean, you know, safety is definitely one, and it's definitely paramount to us. There's also just kind of that balance of what kind of street you know it is and what kind of function it serves. So you know, there are some, you know, we wouldn't be, you know, we might be looking at traffic calming very differently on a residential street that doesn't have a lot of through traffic than we would on something like Liberty Avenue. So we may be doing some bump outs or something like that, and allowing for something like that to happen with the design guidelines on a place like Liberty Avenue that might help pedestrian flow, but where we might be looking at doing something on the street on, you know, an alley or a residential street that might see speed as a, you know, as an issue, or might have safety issues.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. So the fifth priority talks about a commitment to all communities through economic development and neighborhood building support. And I was just wondering that we have so many neighborhoods and communities in Pittsburgh, it would be impossible to positively affect them all equally. So I was wondering, like, what factors will be considered when prioritizing the neighborhoods, which ones will be given the most support in the earliest, and also, like, how are you defining the word commitment in this specific instance?
Bill, do you talk about ULOs at some point as well?
Sure. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah.
There are some funds available in City Council and through the Mayor's Office that are community development block grants that are supposed to be targeted towards certain neighborhood needs and some additional things that may need to be done. Those funds are available for that. Those funds continually shrink on an annual basis because they're allocated by Congress. But there is the opportunity to be able to do that, and that's part of listening and coming to these meetings, and then, of course, your council members and their representatives coming to community meetings and taking a listen at what's going on. Can you want to?
So hi, I'm Josette Fitzgibbons from the URA, and a lot of you know the work that we do. We work in communities throughout the city, but we do, when we're looking at where to spend money, I mean, where to allocate, as Bill said, ever decreasing resources, we often look at, we have a map that we use called the market value analysis, and it's in no way categorizes neighborhoods, but we look at often where there's the most need, where there is some development happening in neighborhoods that are maybe next to neighborhoods that have stronger markets. How can we do projects that pull the strength of one neighborhood into another, so that we're helping to strengthen both sides of it as well. And we really try to, we have two things. One is we are in some ways restricted by community development funding, so that we have to put it into the low and moderate income neighborhoods, but we also look where there is the most need, and also where we can build on assets in neighborhoods, so that we can make the money, the public money that is going in, have the most benefit, and invite other investment as well.
So just to follow up really quickly with the vacant properties question, is there any possibility of using some money to stabilize some of the vacant city-owned properties so that, you know, they don't need to be demolished soon, I guess? Oh, I mean vacant housing specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I can try. One thing, I mean, yeah, I think the answer is that would be great. However, one of the problems that we have is, so the city owns around 7,300 vacant properties that are outside of its facilities. So our parks, our greenways, our, the police station, fire station, EMS, all of those buildings. Out of those, I think there are about 900 that are homes. And out of those 7,300, we don't actually, many times the problem is that we don't actually own them outright. So what happened, and it's something that could, others could teach a course on this much better than I could. But what happens is that we take property for back taxes, and many times there are lots of other liens and things like that that prohibit the city from being able to do anything with a property until it's done what's called quiet title or clearing title to a property. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is many times when we clear title to a property, that is something that the city then tries to sell and dispose of its inventory through our Department of Finance. Mm-hmm. So it's that many of the vacant buildings that we have throughout the city are actually privately owned, and the majority of the majority of those vacant buildings. So I said that we have maybe 900 that are within the city's taken through a treasure sale and have those title issues. There are about 13, I believe it's 13,000 properties through the city that are multiple years tax delinquent, where and the majority of those are structures. So when you see vacant structures a lot of times throughout the city, they're not structures necessarily that the city owns. And there's a lot of work with community organizations through things like the Property Reserve or others for or working with people who have an interest in purchasing some of those tax delinquent properties for the city to try to take those properties and get them to productive reuse. But again, that title action can sometimes take 2 to 3 years. It's not a short process. So it's a very complex issue. One of which I think we understand the frustration sometimes and how vacant buildings can sit and can have those issues.
Yeah. It does seem like somewhat of a unique issue, though, right? In the sense that, like, by not quieting a title, you're kind of committing to this big expense of a demolition down the line, right? So you do you want to pay a little money now, or do you want to pay a lot of money later to deal with this problem that's already on our hands?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is an issue.
Just so you know, part of the problem rests within the state. The state laws are very heavy on property rights and not so heavy on property responsibility, and that's part of our state constitution and how our legislature has felt to deal with it. We do have some tools that allow us, once we gain the property, to be able to do things, but once again, this is a competing expense, because now we're talking about the capital, but then we have to go back to the operating to be able to maintain these things. So we have to hire people, we have to be able to, and that's the best possible case for us, is to act as that pass-through, act as a real estate agent, and try to give it back to the private sector or to the local residents. The emergence of community development organizations were very key in getting rid of a lot of properties that went back on the market or got renovated. If there's a community development corporation out there that can help in your community, that's one way to be able to help expedite and address some of these issues. But it literally takes a village, takes a whole state to get some of these things done. And it is a legal nightmare, and it's part of the problems that we're going to have to live with and figure out how to really work through.
So it seems like the vacant properties were kind of a theme in a lot of the tables, and this question kind of touches on that as well, so I'll change it up a bit because you may have touched about some of the answer in that last answer. But regarding priority number 1, fixing it first, a lot of the conversations we had seem to agree on the importance of maintaining perhaps refurbishing homes, roadways, bridges, and buildings that preserve our cultural history, the aesthetic appeal that Pittsburgh has that draws a lot of people in, and maintains the history that really makes the city appealing, while at the same time not overly investing in things that are outdated or suboptimal and not preparing for the future. So how do you determine when something is past the point of fix it first beyond repair, that you don't want to do that and want to invest in something new? And what criteria plays into determining what places you choose to fix up or resources you choose to invest in. And kind of a sub-point to that, you mentioned a little bit there, but can you specifically say what perhaps organizations you're working with in the city or beyond, or what state or federal grants that you have access to fix up these facilities?
I guess I can start with those. A couple questions there, I guess. I think first, when you said criteria, what process do we use? Just for an example on facilities, for instance, and again, I think it's important to distinguish between city-owned assets, such as that are used for service delivery. So one of the things we want to focus on is a data-driven decision-making process, because frankly, what you have in a city government, things can be a political process. So residents come to council, they whoever yells the loudest or the most, but that's not necessarily the best policy decision. So what we're trying to do, like example on the facilities and other asset side, is work with the consultants and the professional staff engineers and architects to use those measures and say, based on the condition, does it, maybe we have to divest of some of our properties. There may be some properties that are sitting there, and we know that have been closed for more than a decade and are in such disrepair that they should just be demolished or potentially could be sold for an economic development project, or maybe returned to a natural green state. So I think data is the first thing we want to make, because again, we don't have all the resources to meet all of our needs. And I think it was in the materials, last year we received over $100 million in requests for capital projects, and we had half the resources. So it's very unlikely at any time in the near future we're going to have that $100 million. So we're going to have to always make tough decisions. So data is one of the first ones. But also we want to look at other options, such as demographics. So what's going on in the neighborhood? Some of these facilities may have been put in there when there was a lot of children, and now maybe there's a lot of senior citizens, or vice versa. So you want to look at demographics. Who's using them? What's going on in the neighborhood? So a number of different criteria or evaluation areas that we want to look at. Partnering with other organizations. So if you're talking about a recreation or sport facility, are there other facilities in the neighborhood that could meet the needs of the residents in that community? Are there partnerships with the schools or churches, or if there's a YMCA or Boys and Girls Club, whatever it may be, there may be opportunities to continue delivering services, but maybe not just from that same location we're in today. And then we're also, I think you had talked about funding sources. We are aggressively trying to look at money from the state, federal, and foundation communities to help supplement the efforts that we have from local tax and bond dollars as well.
If there was an organization that wanted to get involved and wanted to support your causes there, how could they reach out to the city, and what's the best route to go through?
Yeah, I would say, the contact that David mentioned about the CIP, I think that would be the first thing. One thing we're doing is interesting with City Steps. The city, we're part of this, it's called the City Accelerator. We're one of 4 cities across the United States that's partnering with other organizations to look at how do we invest in our infrastructure. The projects that we submitted were our city steps and city facilities. And as a result of this, we're going to be awarded a $100,000 grant that'll allow us to use to help identify. So for city steps, for instance, we want to go, and a lot of the North Side communities, I'm a North Sider, born and raised and still live here, know that you have a lot of steps, the same way with the South Side. So we want to partner with the community groups to understand, we can have engineers and technicians go out and do a physical condition assessment of a step, but we also need to understand how are they being used. Are these directly used by children to get to school, people in the neighborhood to get to public transportation, or to bike or walk to work? So we need to partner with you to look at our assets to understand how are they being used and what are your needs. So this is one first step coming here, but continuing that dialogue.
Thank you.
Sure.
On the north side, we have many facilities that attract out-of-town visitors, including the National Aviary and the Children's Museum. Yet the lighting in West Park by the Aviary does not work, and that's a very poor reflection on our city. Is maintaining and repairing this type of lighting on the north side and in other neighborhoods a priority in the budget?
Yeah, I could say And I'd say yes, and I don't know if anyone, just so everyone knows about the capital budget, if you actually look in it, one of the things we did in the last 2 years is change it. So before, we would just allocate $2 million for streetlight repair, and you'd have no idea where. It was nice that you could see $2 million was going to streetlights, but you had no idea, is this going to be in my community, or is that going to be across the river in another community? One of the things we developed, and I'll commend Jennifer and Dave and the team, is really provide a lot more transparency, so you can look up and see, you know, what specific deliverables are being done in what community, council district. And so we were talking about the traffic intersections before. It actually lists all the individual intersections in the central business district that are going to be affected. So, you know, we've been working with the councilwoman and the community groups on streetlight activities, not only in the business districts, but working on the parks as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
This is actually a very specific question, and I'm really glad I have an opportunity to ask it. I live sort of diagonally across the street from 1917 Perrysville, which was a beautiful brick building. It was in great shape when Phase went under, at which point it was closed down, everyone was evicted, the utilities were shut off, and it sat there. And it sat there for years. There were 2 fires in that building. I believe it's still structurally sound. I know that there was a tour of the building, various council people and others went through it. And at this point, our understanding is that although BNY Mellon had paid taxes on it, it's not paying taxes any longer. I had thought that the URA owned the building, although I'm not certain, but it's a perfect example of what shouldn't happen in this city, because it was a perfectly great structure with, I believe, 6 apartments in it, and now it's a neighborhood disaster. So the question is, who owns it and why aren't you doing something about it?
I know which property you're talking about. We are trying to do something about it. There is a question of ownership. And it kind of goes back to what he just said about tangled title can be a very, very difficult issue. But URA and Bank of New York Mellon is trying to work this out. We have had inspectors in. We've been working with the bank. We've been working with the community. We realize this is an issue, and we are trying our best to address it. If you want to see me after this is over, I can talk to you a little bit more about it.
Okay.
Hello, our question is about, are there any written standards for pedestrian intersection crossings, lighting, and painting in the city? In other words, there are intersections that have walk, don't walk signs. There are intersections that do not. There are intersections that have painting indicating a pedestrian crossing. There are some that do not. Are there standards in the city for those 2 items?
Yes, there are standards. It depends on intersection and whether if it's vehicular traffic or multimodal. Our traffic engineer has all those standards and she follows those to the exact, is there a specific location you're thinking of, or?
Well, North Avenue right out here. You can see several different modes of indicating when you should cross a street and when you shouldn't, where and when you can't. There doesn't seem to be a standard. Can we access that?
I'm sure you can, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I can follow up with you and
that'd be
give
great.
you that information. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, well, at this point, now we're going to be finishing with this portion of the forum. I'd like you to help us thank the panel for answering 2 of your questions tonight, multiple questions tonight. Thank you, thank you. At this point also, we're turning it over back to you, and now's the time when you maybe take some time to think about what the panelists said, but then complete the surveys. And again, just to remind you, if you want the city to hear something, you want to make sure it's on that survey. Don't feel constricted by just where there's lines and where there's boxes. If you need to say something, it needs to go on the survey, because this is how the city is getting its feedback from these forums. So you want to make sure that if you found something out, if you heard something interesting, and you want to make that part of your own survey, you want to make sure it gets on that survey. But before we end with that, I would like to have you give yourselves a round of applause for devoting your evening here tonight. And thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with the city. And I'd like you to help me thank the moderators who gave up their evening as well to help facilitate your conversations. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. But at this point, after you complete your surveys, please bring them to the front where you registered and hand them in there. And that's how the city will be getting your surveys. Moderators, please collect the questions, and I'll get those from you. But thank you all very much.